right. Hello, everyone. Hi, friends. My name is Kim Jermaine. Thank you for joining us for the official launch of our Mobility for All campaign. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that we all remember to keep ourselves muted. We will be taking a few questions at the end of this event. So when we get to that point, please feel free to drop those questions in the chat box. And we are recording, so if you're not comfortable, feel free to turn your camera off and just join us listening. All right, now that we have some of the logistics out of the way, I just want to tell you all a little bit about this event. Our goal this evening is to introduce you all to our Mobility for All campaign. Many of you probably know that Ccam has spent decades fighting climate change, opposing pipelines, and cleaning up Virginia's power sector. But recently, we've broadened our horizons to the transportation sector, and we hope to give you some context and insight about why, what we've accomplished so far, and what is left to do. Before we get started with that presentation, we're going to do some introductions. My name is Kim Jermaine, and I'm the Virginia Director for Ccam. I've been with the organization for about a year now, and I am joining you all from just outside of Richmond in Glen Allen, Virginia. And we're going to kick it over to Blair.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name is Blair St. Ledger Olsen, and I lead policy work specifically related to electric vehicles right now these days, helping to tackle the transportation sector with the national clean energy nonprofit Generation 180. And tonight I am joining you all from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm really, really happy to be here. I've had the pleasure of working with Kim and her team for over the past year, and as well prior to her joining Ccam, and absolutely happy to be here and love working with this group of folks. So you're in good hands tonight.
Awesome, thanks, Blair. Oh.
Hi, all. My name is Eldella Kinsella. I use either she or they pronouns. I'm the Central Virginia grassroots organizer, and I am based out of Richmond, Virginia. And thank you all for coming out.
Hey everybody, my name is Lauren Landis. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Hampton Roads Field Coordinator for Ccam. I'm based in Williamsburg and I work throughout the Tidewater region.
And Xander.
Hi, I was just getting ready to unmute. Hi, my name is Xander. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Northern Virginia organizer with Ccam, and right now I'm based in Harrisonburg, Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley, but that is not for much longer. And starting in January, I will be up in Northern Virginia. And now we are going to impromptu kick it to Mustafa and Nakia and ask them to introduce themselves as well, even though we did not prep them.
Hi everyone. My name is Mustafa. He, him pronouns. I am the field director for Ccam, so I work primarily in Maryland and Virginia and supporting our Virginia team on executing their campaigns and their field engagement. So it's really nice to see y'all's faces. Some of these names are familiar from the past few weeks. So thanks so much for hopping on with us.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nakia. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the HBCU Grassroots Fellow. I'm currently joining from Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia.
Awesome, thank you, Nakia. And last but not least, helping us with logistics and all things technical, we have Stacy.
Oh, hey everyone, my name is Stacy. I use she or they pronouns. I'm Ccam's social media and data manager, but tonight I am our Zoom wizard. So if you have any technical difficulties, send me a message and we can troubleshoot it together. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks, Stacy. And if you all want to drop in the chat where you're joining us from, we would be happy to know. And I'm going to kick it over to Xander.
Great. So in addition to sharing in the chat, we're also going to get everyone engaged by starting off with just some polls. And the reason we do this is so that we can have everyone have a chance to get their brains warmed up about the topic and have a chance to participate with each other. So the first poll we have, if you can't see it pop up on your screen, put something in the chat or let us know. But the first poll is how much of Virginia's energy related to CO2 emissions comes from transportation. So go ahead and pick whichever percentage you think is the closest. And so this is out of all of the carbon emissions that Virginia as a state produces, of all of the natural gas that is produced, the coal plants that are still here, the agriculture that's around, how much is from transportation? And then the second question is a little bit more personal. It's, what is your primary method of travel? Do you bike around? Do you take a bus? Are you driving a car? Or are you somewhere where you can get everywhere you need to get just by walking around? And as people continue to fill it out, we will also hear if anyone in your household relies on public or alternative transportation, and if so, how frequently. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about is, and you'll hear us say more, either at this launch event or throughout the broader campaign, we'll talk about how we can get public transportation to actually be a reliable alternative. Like, if the difference in going to do all your errands in one car is, you can get that done in 15 minutes, or on a bus, it would take 2.5 hours to get to everywhere you need to go. If you have to change routes, that's not really an alternative. It is public transportation, but it's not a reasonable alternative. And so hopefully by the end of our campaign together and our longer term advocacy, maybe some of these monthlies and annualies that I'm seeing will become a weekly or a daily. And we're also going to think through pre-COVID, how much time did you spend traveling every day? All the stuff you have to get around. And and how would you rate the safety and reliability of transportation in your community? And you can see there's a difference of scale in terms of how safe and reliable that is. And if you, if you want to talk more specifically about whether you believe it is very safe but not reliable, it doesn't look like we have an option to switch those, but we can have a deeper discussion about that in the Q&A. And then the last question is, what stops you from doing this, from having it as the primary alternative for you? Yeah, and like Lauren said, if you have more thoughts or see an answer that you would have given that wasn't offered up, go ahead and let us know in the chat. And I'll give about another minute and then we can go over the polls. I see another Harrisonburg. I got distracted. That's very exciting. Okay,
I can't answer for him, but I probably know what Alan would put for all of these.
Okay, are we good to go ahead and end them and go over the answers? Cool. So we have a split between people that believe 37% comes from 37% of Virginia's transportation emission comes from carbon, and 48%. So 3 people think a little over a third, and 3 people think just less than half. And the 3 with the higher number are correct. If you haven't heard us or read us in many of our documents and advertisements say that almost half of Virginia's carbon emissions come from transportation, you will over the next couple of weeks. And then for their primary mode of transportation, we have, this is actually surprising. We've done this poll a number of times and it's really pretty solidly 5 out of 6 car, 90% cars. Could we just take 1 second, and if people feel comfortable to come off mute and one of the bike or walk people let us know what's that like for you and how you can do that.
I can. Yeah, I bike just about everywhere, which normally just means I show up places sweaty. That's really how it changes my life the most. But I think a lot of that is to be said for living centrally within Richmond proper. So the only errands that I need my car for would like be grocery things with heavier bags. And even then, I live close to the polls, so usually I can take public transit.
So a Harrisonburg person, it's a smaller town geography and the central business district. If you're living in the central business district, you can bike and walk. And then once you get to a higher speed road, there's some barriers and you have to sort of be flexible. But I've also tried an e-bike.
Alan, I've never heard Harrisonburg described as having a central business district, and I grew up here. And I think that is a little aspirational for what this town is like. But
because it's a college town with a lot of teleworkers and
yeah.
folks able to work from home, it's got a very high bike and walk statistic.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to move along because I am making us behind. So does anyone in your household rely on public or alternative transportation, and how frequently? It looks like most people are able to do this monthly and annually. Again, this is also a more public transit, a group that uses public transit more frequently than other groups that we've done this with. So that's exciting to see. And then pre-COVID, how much time did you spend traveling? It looks like we have a lot of people that are able to get their stuff done in around 1 to 2 hours. So that is a very good thing. And could someone go ahead and say how COVID has changed this for them? And if that's changed how they think about transportation at all?
I'm happy to share. I used to, well, first, Xander, I'm sorry you're moving to Northern Virginia. You are moving to the traffic nightmare of the world. Godspeed. But before living in Charlottesville, I commuted an hour into the city and an hour back. Now I'm spoiled and my commute to my office is 15 minutes and 15 minutes back. And even then, sometimes I complain about the traffic in Charlottesville because our roads are old and not designed for the amount of people that we have here. But it really has changed my thought process on just how reliable remote work can be. And now that Virginia is working to expand broadband access using federal dollars, we're seeing more telework and more remote options because since transportation is the largest carbon source of emissions, it's great to open up transportation options that don't require me to bike on a road that's unfortunately currently not designed with safe biking in mind. And that lets me just work from home. So even once we're in a post-COVID or more manageable COVID scenario, I'm still going to stick with a hybrid working solution.
Thanks, Blair. And then it looks like most people are pretty middle of the road in terms of how safe and reliable it is, which is good to hear for us. And that means that it is something that it seems like people would definitely be open to. And now, really the $1 million question is why is this not something we do every day? Why is public transportation not something that we just routinely use? And this really tracks with everything we've seen. It is logistically complicated. It takes more time. If I need to go to get food and go to have fun and go to a work meeting, if those are in different places, it just makes it take way too much time. So this really echoes what we've heard before. maybe in future conversations, it'd be good to have a smaller group conversation about the people that have safety concerns. I don't know if we need to take a ton of time to get into that now, but that seems like an interesting thing that people are bringing to this.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Xander, and thanks everyone for participating and indulging us. It's always interesting to hear how people engage with public transportation and transit generally in their day-to-day lives as we think through our campaigns. So now we will get started with you all, unfortunately, listening to us talk for a little bit. All righty. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Kim. I'm the Virginia Director of Ccam and Ccam Action Fund. I just want to say thank you again for joining us this evening. So let's get to it. This year in Virginia, we faced recurrent flooding and the associated sewage failures. If you live in Richmond, we heard too much about sewage failures this summer. 6 states just experienced their hottest summers on record, and the globe saw an uptick in natural disasters. The impacts of climate change are already on our doorstep. It's a challenge we have to tackle head on and on multiple fronts. In 2020, as some of you may know, Virginia took significant strides to reduce emissions from the energy sector by passing the Clean Economy Act and opting to join RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In 2021, we shifted our focus a little bit to the transportation sector, and we adopted advanced clean car standards and passed the Transit Modernization Study. But there's still a ton of work left to do. You can stay on this slide, Stacy.
Perfect. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Kim. So like we talked about in these first entry polls, carbon emissions from the transportation sector account for close to half of all carbon emissions in Virginia. And that makes transportation the single largest source of carbon emissions in the Commonwealth. We simply can't address the climate crisis without addressing the transportation emissions. And as you can see on this slide, these emissions are actually primarily driven by our personal vehicles, no pun intended. So while these emissions not only harm climate and the environment, they also negatively impact public health. And this burden is inequitably distributed, with communities of color in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic breathing 66% more air pollution from vehicles than white residents on average. Like many of the challenges that we face, decarbonizing the transportation sector is an environmental issue and an equity issue. Next slide.
So where do we start addressing this issue? In order to reduce transportation-related emissions, we will need to rethink housing, how we build our cities, the vehicles we drive, and our transit infrastructure. Here are a few avenues we can take in the near term. We can transition to electric vehicles, fund alternatives to driving, and rethink how we plan our cities. And we'll be focusing mainly on the first two today. Next slide, please.
Awesome. So currently in Virginia, less than 1% of the vehicles on our road are electric. That means we need to accelerate the electrification of cars, trucks, and buses in the Commonwealth. Now, even with Virginia's current electricity mix, EVs create 70% less carbon emissions than comparable gasoline-powered vehicles. So this makes them a powerful climate solution. And even more so when we remember that Virginia is moving to a 100% clean energy economy, thanks to legislation that groups like Ccam helped to pass in 2020. So we've started the work, like Kim said, to accelerate EV adoption in Virginia by passing the advanced clean car standards earlier this year. But increasing the number of EVs on our dealership lots only solves part of the problem. We also need to make electric mobility more affordable, and we need to continue building out the needed charging infrastructure in the Commonwealth. Virginia can also lead by example by electrifying its own fleet. Not only would this support the EV market and provide opportunities for staff to get more experience with electric cars, but it would also save our government considerable amounts of money on maintenance and fuel costs. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Blair. And how does transit fit in? Even if the US is able to switch 70 million drivers to electric vehicles, we will still need to reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled by 20% in the next 9 years to meet our climate goals. So we can do everything possible and in our power to make sure that we're electrifying the vehicles on our roads. But at the end of the day, we also need to make sure that people feel comfortable utilizing alternatives to their personal vehicles. In order to reduce transportation emissions and promote equity, we absolutely have to ensure that our transit systems are safe, reliable, and accessible. We need to invest in and modernize our transit systems so they are optimized for the people that are currently using them, and also viewed as a viable alternative to driving for those who currently rely on their personal vehicles. From increased frequency to benchers and shelters to live tracking and zero fare policies, public transportation can become Virginia's top way to get around with increased investments in our transit system statewide. We also need to invest in making our community safer for pedestrians and cyclists. Simply put, we need to invest in these alternatives so folks can rely less on their personal vehicles. We want to electrify the vehicles already on the road, but we also want to give people other options. We don't want people to feel forced into relying on a personal vehicle to travel and get around. Next slide.
Absolutely, Kim. One of the great things about these two solutions that we're talking about, electrification and reducing vehicle miles traveled, they're mutually beneficial. Reducing the number of vehicles on our road means we don't have to electrify as many. So we've been working on legislation for the past couple of years that are helping to move these goals forward. One of them that Kim and I got to work very closely on was HB 1965, which was the Advanced Clean Car Standards. So this was the passage of this legislation actually made Virginia the first state in the Southeast to adopt the clean car standards, and will expand the choices Virginians have when buying electric vehicles. So you'll see more electric vehicle options on the lots of dealerships here in the Commonwealth. We also worked to ensure that the infrastructure was in place for this transition. So another bill, Senate Bill 1223, carried by Senator Boysko, actually amended the Virginia Energy Plan to include an analysis of electric vehicle charging infrastructure and other infrastructure needs in Virginia's quadrennial energy plan. And last but not least, House Bill 2282 facilitates electrification in a way that protects ratepayers, gives guardrails to utilities, and helps to place an emphasis on utility engagement in EV infrastructure in rural and low to moderate income communities where the private market may not take care of it itself. Over to you, Kim.
Awesome. And beyond electrification, the Department of Environmental Quality has utilized money from the VW settlement to partner with, well, this is still electrification, to partner with EVgo to ensure that by the end of this project, 95% of Virginians will be within 30 miles of a fast charger. This is something we have questions about all the time. I don't have an EV charger close to me. I don't have access to an EV charger at my apartment complex. So the Department of Environmental Quality has used settlement dollars to invest in charging infrastructure to make people feel more secure in transitioning to electric vehicles. And then in transit, HJ 542 was a bill that also passed this past year. This study requires the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to conduct a needs assessment and system inventory. This study will inform future transit investments. This is a really great first step to ensure that we're finding the gaps in our transit systems, whether it be in people aren't using transit systems because there's no shelters, there's no place to sit, there's just not enough frequency or access. What we're hoping to do is utilize this study to find those gaps and invest dollars in the places that need them most. We also had a number of victories for biking and walking, everything from passing the Bicycle Safety Act to a zebra crosswalk study and the option for localities to set speed limits at 15 miles per hour. And also in March, jaywalking was officially decriminalized. You didn't hear that from me, so don't go crazy in the roads, but that did happen this year as well. All righty, and that is it from us. So next slide, Stacy. So despite all of the significant progress we've made in the last few years, given the breadth of the effort to tackle transportation-related emissions, we know that state-level leadership, collaboration, and advocacy will be more important than ever. When it comes to the energy sector, you can kind of point to the smokestacks, you can point to the infrastructure. Transportation is much more complicated because it spans everything from fleets to your personal vehicle to transit systems. And so it's going to take a lot of work. And I'm happy you all are here today. We want to hear from you all about how you'd like to engage. We'd also love for you to invite folks in the future to our events, because we're gonna need a lot of advocacy and grassroots support to make sure that we're not just electrifying, because electrification sounds exciting and it's sexy. People aren't as excited about transit, which is something that we absolutely need to invest in. And so we really need that groundswell of support from everyday folks like you who are having troubles crossing roads safely or getting to places reliably with transit systems, to make sure that decision makers understand the gravity of this situation. All righty, thanks, Stacy. Awesome. And now we're going to answer a few of your questions. We have some pre-submitted questions that folks use the Google form to get to us, but I think we're going to start with some of the questions that have been put forth in the chat.
Yeah, okay, great. So we got some great questions, like Kim said, submitted ahead of time, but I do want to go ahead. Actually, first I'm going to just open it up to the floor so that if you have a pressing question on your mind, you won't forget it. We've got the chat ones already locked and loaded. So go ahead and raise your hand or just come off mute if you have something that you thought of while Blair and Kim were talking. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a question like a straight answer kind of question either. If there's something that really struck your fancy that you want just to talk a little bit more about or have thoughts on, we would love to hear from you. I'm going to give it just a minute to let people's thoughts settle. Okay, I'm going to let y'all keep thinking, and in the meantime, we'll work through some of the questions in the chat. So I'm going to start bottom up. Oh, Stacy, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I feel bad because I'm Ccam staff, and I obviously want to prioritize people who are not staff.
All questions are welcome, Stacy. You know that.
But I feel like this question is kind of relevant because I live in Maryland, but I work kind of in DC and I visit people in Virginia. So, are there any plans to, as part of this campaign, to maybe like improve the WMATA system or bettering transit for people who live not just in Virginia, but commute, work in Virginia or come into Virginia to do leisure activities?
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can try this. It's a good question. Like I mentioned earlier, transportation authorities are really complicated, especially when they cross state lines. But we have seen, and I'm not a federal legislation or policy expert, but fortunately, we have seen increased conversation around making sure that our transit systems are connected, and that we're investing in expanding routes specifically statewide. And so that's something that we have seen increased conversation about. I think there was also, and I don't know the dollar amount, but we saw some heavy investment in the Northern Virginia area through the Department of Rail and Public Transportation earlier this year. So I really do not know the logistics of how to ensure that across states we're making sure that that frequency and connectedness is improved upon. But I do think that with federal leadership, we will we'll see expanded kind of collaboration when it comes to our transit system. And Blair may have a better answer.
I can't speak to what Ccam is planning unless I want to quickly be thrown under an electric bus. But WMATA is actually, and there was a lot of work over probably 2 years in a coalition that Sierra Club actually led. WMATA has announced plans to electrify their fleet. They need funding. A lot of what we're going to when we talk about is that a lot of these climate change solutions are expensive, but it's far more expensive to not do these things by an order of magnitude. So federal funding, state level funding. Alan here has been very influential in helping with the VW settlement funds and making sure those are distributed in a thoughtful manner. And there is funding for fleets that WMATA would qualify for to electrify as well. So WMATA specifically, it's working there, it's getting there, but we have to keep up the pressure as advocates to make sure that they stay accountable for those goals.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. All right, I'm going to work through these in a order that makes sense in my brain. Okay, we have a great question from Robbie. Has any legislation been proposed to provide money for folks in gas cars to transition to EVs? Great question. There's a lot of great information out there about subsidies and tax credits, and Blair is probably chomping at the bit to give some information about this. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
I feel like this is my life these days, or for the past, gosh, years. But Alan, you could even answer better than me potentially. But yes, there's a few different options. There is both the federal tax credit, but I will say that the federal tax credit, because of how it's structured, where it rewards people with the most money, with the highest tax liability, with the greatest refund, is not really progressive. It has been single-handedly responsible for where the EV market is today. So I don't want to hate on it too much. But Kim and I have actually been working to fund the most equitably designed EV rebate policy in the country. And what we've codified and now need to go after funding for in this upcoming session is an EV rebate that gives more money to people that make the least amount of money, is point of sale, meaning you don't have to still be able to afford the upfront cost of a car in order to go electric. It helps bring down that cost immediately. And it's available on used vehicles as well. So we want to make sure that that rebate program has significant funding so that we can help people who really want to get out of their gas guzzling cars, but just can't afford to do so. And I work with EV owners and people who want to go electric every single day. And I can't tell you how often I hear, I really want to go electric. I just can't afford to right now. Buying a car is expensive, and particularly new cars. I get that. We're working on it, I swear. Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
Thanks
and
so much, Blair.
To Blair's point, the rebate is a sore subject because, as Blair mentioned, it has a really great structure, and that rebate is here in Virginia. We passed the structure for an electric vehicle rebate. The reason why you haven't heard about this really great rebate is because there's no money in the pot right now. So we're going to continue to advocate for that, and hopefully in the near future, folks can take advantage of that rebate. Some good news, and maybe not as exciting as a rebate, is that with technological advancements in the next 5 years, we're hoping that we'll see price parity between electric vehicles and gas guzzlers. And so hopefully in the next few years, electric vehicles will become overall more accessible to folks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Let's see, the fun question, some transportation emissions, hoodies and t-shirts. I see Blair told you where to direct us for Gen 180. Quick plug for Ccam, we are rolling out a brand new membership program, which includes lots of new exciting opportunities for Ccam members to talk with us more about important things and fun things like swag. So I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to drop our membership page down in the chat so that you can figure out how to become a member and join opportunities like our state monthly meetings where you can bring issues like that up and we can get some cool new swag designed if we can. So that's a fun, very important, great question. Swag is great. Okay, a couple of questions that I'm going to bundle together. We had a question about what is a fleet, and then also a question about personal vehicles versus freight. So I'm wondering if Blair and Kim could give us a little bit of definitions related to personal vehicles versus fleet versus freight, and any information you might know off the top of your head in terms of emission kind of percentages or just what's being tackled in those areas.
Kim, do you want to take fleets? And then I actually went and pulled up the greenhouse gas emission stuff that broke down by vehicle type, so I can answer that second.
Yeah, I was going to say Blair and I just did a presentation a couple weeks ago, so I know she knows the emission breakdowns. But fleets are essentially the vehicles that are owned and operated by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So those may be things like emergency vehicles or the vehicles used by public universities. And the goal with electrifying state fleets or investing in transitioning those fleets is that it's something that we can do kind of in one foul swoop rather than waiting on folks to like electrify their individual vehicles. And so that's a really great opportunity to electrify a big bundle of vehicles at one time if we can get states invested and the Commonwealth invested in electrifying fleets. So when you hear the word fleets, it's just the cars you see operated by VDOT or other state agencies.
So in terms of, I saw this question in the chat and immediately said, okay, I have to go find this graph. And this isn't public data yet. It was reported to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and we just happen to have the inside scoop. This is where you go to get the insider information. But I saw this question in the chat, how much is personal vehicles versus freight? And based on what time that came in, I'm guessing we were talking about emissions. So for 2005 to 2018, DEQ just released this data. Light duty vehicles, so our personal cars, are 60% of transportation emissions as a whole. So like Kim had on that slide earlier, that's almost 40% of emissions total. So it's really personal vehicles is the huge chunk. If by freight you mean rail is 1.7%. If we're talking about freight in terms of shipping containers and the like, heavy duty, which is a lot more than just freight, but heavy duty is 26%. But this breakdown really emphasizes just how much we need to make transportation access that doesn't rely on personal vehicle use far more accessible, and then electrify everything that remains.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Okay, there's two more questions that I want to get to before we have some time to talk about accessibility, if we can fit it in. Okay, may have missed it, but does the strategy to increase EV charging station deployment focus on heavily populated areas, more users, probably meaning urban, or rural areas, potentially longer commutes for users? So any thoughts, Blair and Kim, on kind of the geographic distribution of charging infrastructure?
I can kick us off there. It's twofold, because those are two different approaches. Those urban markets where there's already a lot of EV adoption is really where that private market is going to go, and is in part where the VW settlement money working with EVgo is focused on community centers, for instance, your Harris Teeters, your really where are you going during your day to charge? And then there's the flip side of that. There's highway corridors, and more rural communities. We want to make sure we don't have charging deserts. And that's in a lot of ways a place that the utility can play a role, because they already have the electrical infrastructure running in those communities anyway. So that's why Kim and I helped with a bill championed by Delegate Sullivan to work with what we call the SEC, which is our Public Utility Commission, to have a working group that'll help outline some guardrails for how the utilities can play a role and making sure that they're actually actively installing charging infrastructure, both in rural communities along those transportation corridors, as well as helping with multi-unit dwelling residents, for instance, where the infrastructure cost to break up all that concrete is really, really expensive. And so having the utility play a role there as well. We're going to get all of it is the goal, but it is two separate strategies for the rollout.
That's a super helpful way to frame it. Thanks so much, Blair. Okay, another really kind of cool narrative question that we had submitted was from a supporter that said, we used to live in a city where we could walk to almost everything. We live in Hanover now. Will we ever have light rail as they do in Europe to go into the city? I'm going to pitch this one over to Kim.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Fortunately, some of the infrastructure for this trip specifically already exists, at least in Ashland. Part of the problem is frequency. So the first thing we have to do is advocate for operating dollars so that we can ensure more frequency on those routes. And if we advocate for hourly service to and from Washington, D.C. from Richmond, that would likely mean increased frequency through Ashland. And so we've seen some good news when it comes to trips from Washington, D.C. to Richmond and vice versa. But if we advocate for making that hourly, that would also mean increased frequency for the connecting hubs. That unfortunately is just because there happens to be a stop in Ashland. So that increased frequency may not be the case for places that do not have rail connections. Like I mentioned earlier, and I'm putting high hopes and getting my hopes up for the findings of the transit modernization study. But the goal there is to find gaps in our transit system. And so those areas where there are large populations or easy access logistically, but there just aren't rail connections. Hopefully we will have some data about where those areas are for future investment.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kim. I want to spend the last minute, which is obviously not enough, but I do want to make sure that we're respecting everybody's time tonight, and we can, for any of these questions, including the next one, please contact us. I'm going to ask one of our coworkers, maybe Mustafa, to drop some contact us pages and emails in there. We could all talk about all of this stuff for much longer. So please contact us if you need more guidance on any of this. So I want to spend the last minute or so talking a little bit about accessibility. Obviously, public and alternative transportation is not of value if it's not something that is accessible for everybody, and that goes for both really common accessible needs and maybe some not so common needs. So I'm just wondering, Kim and Blair, if y'all had any thoughts reading the accessibility, comments and stories in the chat, and what accommodations are in the works for everybody to be able to use it.
Yeah, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, there was some progress made this past year to ensure that people walking and biking have the ability to safely use our roads, but we're a long way from where we should be, whether it be ensuring safe crosswalks, whether it be designated bike lanes, or making sure that there are bump outs so people can safely just cross the road or avoid being hit. There are a great group of folks specifically here in Richmond that are working on biker and pedestrian safety. It's something that we, or at least I don't have a ton of expertise. It's something that we're hoping to get involved in over the next few years. And it's something that is just going to take a lot of kind of learning for myself and for our staff, because like I mentioned earlier, the transportation as sector as a whole is new to Ccam, but specifically biking, walking, pedestrian safety, that's really new. And so we know that it's an alternative that not only increases equity and is accessible to more folks, but it also is a climate solution. So it's something that we will definitely be looking to delve into in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that like Kim said, it takes time to make these changes. If we could magically blow up all of our streets and redesign them overnight, we absolutely would, but it does take time, and it's actually carbon intensive to do so, to rip up all that concrete and lay new foundations. And so that progress will look a little bit slower from the outside view. So don't let that discourage you. We are working on it. It is absolutely a priority. But the length of time that takes is why we do also focus on the electrification, to make sure that both of these solutions are moving as fast as possible. And just as a side note, when I taught at UVA, every semester I had a student get hit on a bike by a car. That may or may not be because there's a running rumor that if UVA hits you with one of their buses, they'll pay for your tuition. But I never encouraged my students to go that route. But I did always had a student who ended up calling out and saying, I'm so sorry, I can't make it to class. I've been hit by a car. So we really do need to invest in infrastructure and get that build out started so that biking and walking are more safe options.
Such a scary thing that we need to avoid. Thank you, Blair. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And yes, we could talk all night about, accessibility needs, and Mustafa's dropping some information in there. Please don't let any questions or comments go unheard. We would love to chat with you forever about this. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Blair to get some feedback on the information that you've learned today. We have some other great questions that we had awesome feedback for you as well. So watch out for next events and things like that so we can get you more information.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to Ccam for trusting me with the magic behind the scenes access. And I will be adding Zoom Wizard to my resume. Thank you for that terminology. So we're going to just get some quick wrap up information in these last 10 minutes about you all and what you learned and what you'd like more information about. So I'm going to go ahead and launch these polls and we can walk through them. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat, raise your hand. So please go ahead and take these, and then hopefully that'll help us be even better prepared to work with you guys moving forward. Okay, so there's 5 questions in total. And I'm sorry if you're sick of hearing my voice. I promise to make this quick. The first one is, did you learn something new about transportation in Virginia? This one's easy, yes or no. Then we've got number 2 is, do you have any follow-up questions about the new information you learned? Yes, get me in touch with my organizer. And if you've got questions about EVs, you're welcome to always reach out to me. I am an EV owner and I'm always happy to talk to you about driving electric. Question number 3, what action will you commit to taking? You can grab coffee with your local organizer. You can research different transportation options. You can even attend meetings to help guide Ccam and the work that they're doing. Take a bus to a grocery store, take a walk with a friend. We like to say at Generation 180 that your energy matters. You can be a part of a coalition, and you can also do everything in your daily life to also help make a difference. Number 4, what skills can you contribute to Ccam's Mobility for All campaign? In climate change work, it's about giving what you have. So is that writing or rallying or logistical planning or even artistic expression? Are you funny? We need jokes. If you are funny, please give that to us. There's a lot of jokes about walking into a bar with an ICE vehicle and asking for ice in your glass. That's all we got when it comes to cars. So we need help. And then 5, this one is a little bit for me, but I hope you answer it. Have you considered buying an electric vehicle? Yes, I own an EV. I'm in the market. Yes, I'm worried about the cost. I'm worried about charging infrastructure. Or no, I don't know enough about them. And absolutely no shame on that one. There's a lot to learn. So keep those answers coming in. I can see how many of you have and haven't answered. So would love to get just 1 or 2 more people to submit their answers, and then we will go ahead and wrap things up and hand things back over to the lovely Ccam team.
While Blair is letting the last responses come in, I did see something that being friends with Blair, I cannot let it go unanswered in terms of range. So we just wanted to say that, here we go. There are many myths out there designed to keep you out of an electric car, but the biggest is range anxiety. So Robbie, you are not alone. The average American drives around 30 miles a day, which is well under the average range of an all-electric vehicle. An EV can be your perfect daily driving choice. Plus, there are now more than 10 models with ranges upwards of 200 miles. And we also have some more great information around kind of flexibly choosing different modes of transit for different needs. You don't have to only have an EV to only take you everywhere all day, every day. So we can definitely talk more about that. So sorry, Blair, I couldn't let that go unanswered.
No, I love it. I mean, I have an electric vehicle with only 100-mile range because my husband and I really wanted the Mini Cooper. And we have a second car that we never use, and I'm pretty sure it's dead in our driveway because we haven't turned it on in 6 months. But a different story for a different time. But my husband commutes to Richmond in it. And really owning an EV cures range anxiety. All of the EVs that are on the market today can take you to where you need to go and back, no problem. It's just different. Change is hard. Learning how to find your EV chargers in your community, figuring out, really what range do you actually need, can be a little bit intimidating, but they're so fun to drive and they're so much better for the environment. So they really are a great option. All right, I think I've been sharing the exit polls. I'm thrilled to see that everyone learned something new. That's fantastic. It means we did our jobs. And then I'm really happy to see that there's a handful of you who want to get in touch with an organizer. So whether or not that's Elle or Lauren or Xander or somebody else on the Ccam team, I'm sure they will follow up with you. What action can you commit to taking? I love that folks want to grab coffee, because who doesn't love coffee? Or hot chocolate, come on. And then, research, I'm sorry, I love hot cocoa. Research public alternative transportation options that fit your need. Just taking that leap and taking a look at what your options are is really the first step. So love to see that. And then we've also got people who are willing to take a walk with a friend, cardio health, heck yeah. So what skills can you contribute to Ccam's Mobility for All campaign? Writing, amazing, we need it. Logistical planning, amazing, we need it. I think I saw Alan is willing to give snark and information about federal policy in the chat. So bring on the snark. We need that uplifting, happy times in our lives to keep going in this work. And then 5, have you ever considered buying an electric vehicle? I love how many people are looking at going electric, are honest about what their barriers are, or want to learn more. So after this event, Xander and I will work to make sure that everyone who answered that, depending on what you answered, gets the information that you need. So thank you so much for answering all those polls, and I will stop talking so you can stop hearing my voice and hand it back over to the amazing Ccam team.
As we wrap up and continue to thank y'all for spending your evening with us, we just have a couple announcements / next steps. The first one is that we are going to be offering opportunities to learn how to take the information and new knowledge that you have and share it with your elected representatives. So as you continue to hear from Ccam and be in relationship with us, be on the lookout for trainings about how to do a lobby day, write a letter to the editor, host an event to organize your neighbors, and otherwise continue to get some tangible skills to put this information into practice. And another place where you can talk about that will be our Virginia statewide meeting, which will be on Tuesday, November 9th in the evening, and that'll be a virtual event. And there is not a sign up page at the moment, but that'll go out in email probably about a week before the event. So be ready to come in and talk with us about statewide campaigns, including this one. And then the third thing to do is to think about becoming a member of Ccam. And we have more information about what exactly that means. And we would love to get in touch with the people who signed up to hear about a one-on-one. And even if having a one-on-one isn't your thing, we do have a survey that we'd love for you to fill out so we can know more about how you do want to engage, so that we can meet you where you're at. So go ahead and check that survey. I think that's been shared a couple times in the chat. And the last thing that we added on here recently is to go ahead and vote, because that is coming up and it is looking close.
Awesome. Thank you, Xander. And as Xander mentioned, we have statewide elections. We also have House of Delegates races throughout the Commonwealth. And we're not going to tell you how to vote. We just want to make sure that you get out and cast your vote. So that is it. Early voting has already started. And so you can do that and you don't have to even wait in line on election day. So thank you all for coming and joining us today. I just want to say that this is just the first step of this Mobility for All campaign. As we mentioned, we've done a lot of work and there's a ton left to do. And so whether you have the ability to write or you can draw, we can use all of your skills to affect change, whether it be at the legislature or with state agencies. And so this is just the first step to getting you all engaged with the work that we're doing, to hear from you all about the problems that you're facing so that we can craft the solutions to meet your needs. And so we look forward to hearing from you all. Fill out that survey and our organizers will be in touch and they will take you up on the offer to get coffee. So we did not take that lightly. So thank you all so much for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around and ask them. But otherwise, we will say good night.
Good night. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.